The moon hung low over the dense forest, its pallid light barely cutting through the skeletal branches clawing at the sky. 5 friends, Emma, Mark, Sophie, Ben, and Rachel, had rented the secluded cabin for a weekend getaway. They laughed and teased each other as they set up their final activity for the evening, telling ghost stories around a roaring campfire. The flames danced in the night, casting flickering shadows that seemed alive. Mark, always the dramatic one, leaned forward and began. "Did you know that this cabin is famous for a story? They call it the campfire curse. Supposedly, anyone who stays here hears whispers in the night, like echoes of a campfire that never went out." The group chuckled nervously. Rachel rolled her eyes. "A typical ghost story to freak us out. Nice try, Mark." "No, really?" Mark continued, his voice dropping. "They say if you hear the whispers and ignore them, you'll disappear. Forever. The last group to rent this place vanished without a trace." A branch snapped somewhere in the woods, making them all jump. Ben laughed, trying to mask his nerves. "Just a deer or something. Relax, guys." But the air felt different now, heavier. The fire cracked, sending a spray of embers into the air, and Emma shivered despite the warmth. As the night wore on, the stories grew darker. Each tale seemed to resonate in the quiet woods, the trees almost leaning closer to listen. When it was Rachel's turn, she hesitated. "I don't have a story," she admitted, looking uneasy. "Make one up," Sophie urged. Rachel sighed and began speaking. "Okay, imagine a group of friends sitting around a campfire. They're laughing, telling ghost stories, just like us. But one by one, they realize something's wrong. Someone in their group, a loud snap echoed behind them, cutting her off. Everyone turned, hearts pounding. A large tree limb had fallen just outside the circle of light. Rachel swallowed. "Someone in their group isn't real," she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. The fire flared suddenly, an unnatural brightness forcing them to shield their eyes. When it dimmed, Rachel was gone. "Rachel?" Emma called, her voice trembling. There was no answer. They scrambled to their feet, searching the perimeter of the campsite. "This isn't funny," Ben shouted into the darkness. Another snap, this time closer, followed by the faintest sound. A whisper. It was indistinct at first, like the rustling of leaves, but then it grew louder, forming words. One by one. Mark grabbed a flashlight, sweeping the beam over the trees. The light caught something. A pale face peering out from the woods. He froze. "I saw something," he whispered, his voice breaking. "What?" Sophie cried, clutching Emma's arm. It was Rachel, but her face... Mark couldn't finish. Mark couldn't finish. Sophie collapsed, her body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. Ben and Mark tried to pull Emma away, but she was rooted in place, her eyes wide with terror. "Run!" Ben shouted, grabbing her arm and yanking her toward the cabin. Mark followed, slamming the door shut behind them. Inside, they bolted the door and doused the lights. The whispers followed, growing louder, almost deafening now. "This can't be real," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. Mark, pale and shaking, whispered, "Look!" On the cabin walls, written in soot, were 5 names, their names. One by one, the names began to vanish, starting with Rachel's, then Sophie's. "Where's Ben?" Emma asked, panic rising. Mark turned, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Ben was gone. And then Emma noticed it, Mark's reflection in the cabin's cracked mirror. His face wasn't his, it was warped, his eyes hollow and black, his mouth twisted into an unnatural grin. "Mark," she whispered, stepping back. He turned to her, his face now completely normal. "What?" She pointed to the mirror, and he hesitated. Slowly, he turned to look, and the reflection grinned wider, mouthing words Emma couldn't hear. Then, without warning, Mark dropped to the floor, lifeless. The whispers stopped. Silence enveloped the cabin. Emma, alone now, backed into a corner, clutching a knife she'd found in the kitchen. Her heart raced as she waited for whatever came next. The fire outside roared back to life, impossibly bright. She crawled to the window to peer out, and her blood turned to ice. Around the campfire sat her friends, staring into the flames. Their faces were blank, their eyes glowing softly in the flickering light. But when they turned to look at her, their mouths opened in unison, emitting a guttural scream that echoed through the woods. Emma stumbled back, her mind racing. She turned to the cabin's front door, planning to run, only to see herself standing there, staring back at her. Her reflection smiled, lifting a finger to its lips. "It's your turn." The door swung open, and the whispers consumed her. The next morning, the cabin stood silent, the campfire extinguished. Another group of hikers arrived, laughing and joking, ready to enjoy their weekend. And deep within the woods, faint whispers began to stir.